Pray with me. God, we truly want to be more loving, more holy, and more Christ-like. So help us, Lord, to put aside the weight of all the condemnation we have for ourselves and for others, and help us live into the life you have for us. Loving God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Some days I feel like Ezekiel looking out over that valley of dry bones. Everything looks like a pile of skeletal remains. There's no life in them, just bleached out white hunks of calcium discarded by the years that have flown by. Years of people's lives. Years of dreams deferred, dried up like a raisin in the sun. Years of hope left unfulfilled. Years of war machines ravaging Ukraine, Syria, Palestine, Yemen, Ethiopia, Somalia, South Sudan, Mexico, and Myanmar. We see economic downturns and runs on banks. We see our children engaged online and in real-world fights to the death. And we look around and we see decline in the numbers of good folks filling the pews. It's easy to look through Ezekiel's eyes and see nothing but death. Jesus tells us not to judge and not to condemn. Like the Spirit of God blowing into those dry bones, Jesus speaks words of life, and our focus changes. We begin to catch glimpses of the new life springing up all around us. We see the strength in our congregations. We see the multitude of ministries carried on by individuals and groups all around us. We see our children caring for animals and for each other. We hear the waters of baptism rolling down the mountain, ready to overwhelm us with this new thing that God is doing. We would do well to listen to Jesus tell us not to judge, because if we look at those bones, we would decide there is no life to be had. But if we listen to the rustle of the Spirit, we find our pulse quickening with the unfamiliar thrill of hope. This is not the normal reading for the 5th Sunday of Lent. We usually get the story of Lazarus. It too is a story of resurrection. In it, we find Jesus and the disciples working in another city while his friend Lazarus is sick and dying. Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, send word to Jesus about their brother's dire condition. And Jesus chooses to stay where he is until 2 days later, according to John, when he tells the disciples it's time to go back to Judea. Their friend is dead. Martha runs out to meet Jesus as he's walking up that road, and they have a discussion. Martha's already judged the situation. Lazarus is dead, and his resurrection will come, like everyone's, at the end of time. Jesus tells her, I am the resurrection and the life. She doesn't understand how this will help her dead brother. It's been days, and the stench of death has overtaken him. The mourning has begun. The valley of dried bones is stretched out before her. But she states her belief that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. Then she goes and tells Mary that Jesus wants to talk to her. Mary goes to him and falls down at his feet. She had judged the situation as well. If Jesus had been there, her brother would not be dead. And the word that the Greek uses to describe Jesus' reaction is translated as he was troubled. But it means so much more than that. He was angry. He was sad. He was filled with some complicated emotion that we want to simplify so we can analyze it but that would be to judge it too quickly. We know that grief is complicated. There's anger and fear and loss and betrayal and resignation that this is just the way things go. And I would imagine for Jesus, there were even a few more layers. Jesus was there at the beginning of the world. He had been with God and was God as God spoke the world into existence. As God breathed out in love, such overwhelming love that it could not be contained, and created everything in that act of love. God carved the delicate flowers that would bloom first in the dead of winter, the tiny snowdrops that signal the coming warmth. God molded the giant whale that would swim in the ocean. God, with Jesus there beside him, in whatever way the divine divides itself, which is a mystery beyond my understanding. Jesus helped form people from the dust of the earth and breathed God's own breath into them and set them up to live their lives. And God accompanied them all the days of their life, even when they messed up. Even when they chose death over life, pride over compassion, fear over trust. God was with them until such time as God was born to a woman, very God and very man, and walked the dusty roads of Judea and taught them and fed them and healed them, and then prepared to die, because when the very Son of God calls Lazarus up out of that grave, the world changes. It's one thing to bring wine to a party. It's a whole nother thing to upset the entire course of life. Jesus goes to the cave where Lazarus has been dead for 4 days, dead enough that there was no mistaking death for a coma, dead enough that even his sister was horrified about what they would see when they moved that stone out of the way. Lazarus was dead until Jesus called his name. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. We do not see with the same eyes that God sees. Yes, this resurrection was the final straw. The authorities could not allow dead folks to return to life. The authorities want life to proceed along predictable paths so that they can profit from those paths. Authorities want to judge and condemn because when we judge and condemn, we hold the power. We get to say what is right. We get to define the terms and conditions under which life will happen, but God, and God alone, is the author of life. God and God alone determines the number of our days. Jesus has declared that he is the resurrection and the life. If we believe in Jesus, even if we die, we live. In Jesus, we will never die. And I know it doesn't make any sense. We see death all the time. We feel that pain that gripped Jesus at the loss of his friend. We know the pain, the sickness, the trials, the disappointments. We know it all. But we also know Jesus. We know that while the authorities did their best to stop Jesus, they failed. We know that though they crucified him, killed him, deposited his body in a tomb, he did not remain dead. We know that we do not have to fear death because we are the followers of one who has overcome death and sin. We do not judge because we are not the final arbiter. We are not the one who gets to decide the verdict. We are simply walking each other home. We're trying to understand, trying to live, trying to believe. It is Jesus and Jesus alone who gets to judge us. And he knows what it means to be human. He knows what it is to struggle at the grave of a friend. He knows our pain and our weakness. He knows the taste of grief, and He has compassion for us. My beloved, it is tempting to look out on the world as though it were a valley of dry bones, but in God's hands, not even the driest of bones will stay dead. They will all rise again. God is not done with us yet. God is calling us forward into new life, telling us to leave the cave of death and step into the light of life, to fully embrace the life we have been given, knowing that Jesus is the resurrection and the life. In Him there is no turning to death. In Him there is no condemnation. In Him there is joy and hope and life for which we can say, thanks be to God. Amen.